What's up, homies? What's up, homies? What's up, homies? Welcome to the Knowledgeable Homeowner Podcast. We pick the brains of industry pros to unlock the trade secrets of homeownership. Our mission is simple: to turn everyday people into knowledgeable homeowners. What's up, homies? Welcome back to the Knowledgeable Homeowner Podcast. I'm Sturdy Joe. Today, we're talking mold. I got the Long Island mold guy here with me, Dominick. How are you doing today? What's going on, man?
I'm doing great, Joe. Great to be here. I'm excited to talk about mold.
Thank you so much for coming on, man. I appreciate you coming into the barn. Why don't you take a second, introduce yourself, let the people know who you are and how the Long Island mold guy came to be.
Well, again, you already said my name is Dominick, native Long Islander. I've been in the restoration business for over 30 years. But after doing it for so long, I wanted to kind of scale it to something a little more less crazy and not the 24/7 melee that it becomes. And I focused on mold, and I've spent a lot of time researching it, learning about it, and learning from the people affected by it. And I just love what I do, and I love helping those people that are affected by it.
Nice. So restoration. So you're in the restoration business, which includes mold. Like mold cleanups can be a part of the restoration business. So you're around mold.
Correct.
But more recently, you funneled your focus into mold restoration. How long ago was that?
Right, I became Long Island mold guy.
Nice.
I would say probably in 2018.
2018.
Again, being in the restoration industry is a little annoying. You're dealing with insurance carriers. They're making you wait on the money, and it just became extremely frustrated. So I wanted to cut that part out.
Nice.
Because most mold isn't covered by insurance.
Oh, wow.
And I deal directly with the homeowners themselves, and I never deal with the carriers, so I don't have to deal with the shady part of the industry that I just don't like. It is lucrative for other restoration companies, but I'm just looking for a different way to make money and sleep at night and be comfortable with what I do.
You bring up a really interesting point there. So doing the mold restorations was one of the things that made you partial to doing mold, was that ability to provide a really good service for people that need it. Is that why you, because in restoration you could have done fire, you could have done a million different things. You landed on mold. Was that personal part of it, like a big factor for you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, seeing the people affected by it becoming sick, I feel that I'm a people person and I get along with people. And a lot of these people affected by mold are emotional, distraught, overwhelmed. And I provide not only a service, but a shoulder to cry on, an ear to listen. And I feel like even sometimes I'm like almost a therapist.
Yeah.
And I get to know the people, they get to know me, and this overall experience is just great. And that's why I like doing it, and that's why I chose to do it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've recalling back on my experiences with it, mold does bring up a lot. Like when people have been dealing with mold for a long time, it causes a lot of health issues, and it definitely it disturbs their life.
For certain individuals, it can. And then sometimes I see quite the opposite. They'll be living in mold-infested homes and don't really care.
Yeah.
Maybe they care, but they just don't seem as concerned as the person who's physically
Well, so I think some
affected by
people
it.
can be less sensitive to mold, and then some people could have severe allergies
Yes.
to mold. They could also be living with different types of mold, right? There's multiple species of mold and
Absolutely.
with different various effects. So let's roll it back. Let's keep it super basic. And I know this is probably not such a straightforward answer, but let's see if you can give a straightforward answer. What is mold?
It's a fungus.
It's a fungus.
Yeah.
And it occurs everywhere in the world. We're breathing in mold potentially right now, being in a detached garage.
Absolutely, because it's always in the air. It may not be bad, but it's in our environment, and it serves its purpose in the environment by deteriorating and breaking down leaves and other stuff like that in the environment. But once it gets in the house and starts growing in the house, it basically will do the same exact thing. It'll eat your structure, so we don't want it there.
Yeah, so to be overly technical and be specific, mold necessarily alone isn't the issue. It's concentrations of mold in our home.
Correct.
That can be the issue.
Right, and it's not necessarily what's in the air, because there's always going to be a concentration of mold in there. In any air test, every single time, there will always be mold in it. But if we have something in the home that's creating mold, a leak or some type of moisture source. It could even be humidity. Now that's allowing mold to grow, and that's what we don't want. Yes, it's going to be in the air. We don't want a lot of it in the air, but when you start seeing it grow in the house and it's growing, and now that's invading your airspace, that's when it really becomes bad.
Yeah, so in a home, our concern is raised mold levels.
Right.
And
certain species.
And certain species
like
of
Stachybotrys.
And that's the black mold, right? Stachybotrys
or
is
what people like to call
black mold.
Right,
So,
there's all colors.
yeah, there is. I had a picture I was going to send you the other day. I was in a crawl space, and it was like a rainbow of mold. There was yellow, green. It was crazy.
Colors.
But, all right, so raised mold levels in a home. What are the side effects of that? What is the problem with having raised mold levels in a home?
For those sensitized individuals, it could be anything from coughing, wheezing, runny nose, watery eyes, to some more severe cases. And especially if it's associated with something else, like some people who have an issue with Lyme and then become affected by mold, it makes it even worse. And it can trigger other things I've heard, like panda. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but it's some type of disorder that people say they're affected by mold from it. So it can do a lot of different things to certain individuals.
Yeah, so that's really why some people can be so adversely affected by it, because it can worsen other symptoms. Other symptoms can make your mold sensitivity go up. So it's raised mold levels in a home. It lowers the indoor air quality, and people who are sensitive to it are breathing it in. Are there other side effects that could affect a home in different ways where mold is issue? Like mold eats wood? Mold
Absolutely,
eats structures, yeah?
Yeah, I've done a job. I'd open up the sheetrock wall, and there's no more sheathing. That mold ate all the plywood. There's nothing there anymore. All I see is the insulation for the house. I was amazed. It just basically ate it all away. It was nothing but dust anymore. So it's going to affect wood. It's going to deteriorate sheetrock. If you let it go, and especially if there's a moisture source feeding it, it's just going to get worse and worse. Yeah.
So being on the South Shore, Long Island, crawl spaces are just damp, nasty messes, and I go into them all the time. And obviously we see a ton of termite damage, powder post beetle damage.
Yeah, well, they like moisture too.
They like moisture too, and it's amazing because I do think that some, if not a lot, of misidentified wood-destroying insect damage is actually more mold damage. And I can see it when I look at a joist and I see that it's covered in mold. Right. And it's also the hollow part of the framing is what's covered. That was the mold that ate the wood.
Right.
So
well,
mold,
you know the difference. I mean, when you see termites, typically you'll see trails, and the rot is a little different. It's like almost like a dry rot. Even though termites like moisture, when you see the wood and you start breaking apart from termite damage, it's very, very dry and brittle. When you have it with mold, it's usually wet and it's just gross and stinky and moist, like wood you would find laying outside for a little while.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a plethora of issues associated with mold in a home, and you mentioned, so your job is you do mold cleanups, right?
Or what we refer to as mold remediation.
Mold remediation.
So we try to locate the source, have that rectified, and also take care of the mold at the same time.
Okay. All right. So I mean, I know every job's different. There's a million different ways to find mold in a home, but what is a run-of-the-mill mold remediation look like? What's the process? I call you. I am having allergies in a certain room, or maybe I see mold on a wall. What does that process look like?
Well, first and foremost, because there's a mold law in New York State, I'm typically going to refer the customer to a mold assessor or inspector to create a written mold remediation plan. I can't do that at that property if I intend on doing the remediation.
So that's where that line separates. So as a home inspector, a lot of home inspectors are mold inspectors. So the mold inspector and the mold remediation company, two separate parties.
Right.
And it has to be two separate parties.
It has to be. It's against the law, and it's considered a conflict of interest. I'm licensed as both, but I can't do both at the same time.
On your own job. So and just to explain to people who don't know, what is the mold assessor doing, and why does that tie into why they can't do both?
Well, basically, they're the eyes and ears for the customer. The law was created for consumer protection, so they're hiring that mold assessor to come in there for them, determine what's going on, how extensive the mold issue is, and put a report together with lab results and a written mold remediation plan to give to the mold remediation contractor. And then the job is performed, and that mold inspector will come back once more again at the end to re-inspect and make sure that job was done within the law and within standard protocol.
Okay. All right. So that makes a lot of sense. So the mold assessor determines the amount of mold, the species of mold. They'll put together a remediation plan.
Correct. I may even know how much mold is there because I went and looked at it.
Yeah.
Wow. We got to get
With
the inspector in here.
yeah.
Let's do this right and buy the book and get the plan written and do the job correctly.
Now that process, you said that's a New York State law. So that has nothing to do with the insurance process. That's just how a New York State wants mold remediation done. So if I'm paying you out of pocket or if insurance is paying you, it goes mold inspector testing the air, mold remediation company cleaning it up, following the remediation plan.
Yep.
And then the inspector will come back, test the air again,
Right.
and make sure that the mold is
Yeah,
gone.
make sure that, again, there's always going to be mold in the air, but they want to see any bad molds now gone from that air sample and levels reduced from what they originally were.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we called you or the mold assessor. We have raised levels of mold in the home. We want the cleanup done.
Right.
What does a cleanup entail? An average
If
cleanup?
there's no visible mold and you just have elevated levels, typically a mold inspector will suggest that we go in the home, contain those elevated areas away from the rest of the rooms, so those unaffected areas are okay. We'll set up HEPA air filtration, and then we will clean that room with HEPA vacuuming and damp wiping with an antimicrobial solution. Once everything's been cleaned and free of debris and particulate, we'll then treat everything with a botanical disinfectant and then leave that equipment in place for additional 48 hours to capture any fugitive dust or spores or anything like that.
And that equipment is the HEPA air filters.
Correct.
And HEPA is a rating for the filter that it can catch the mold?
Right. Well, we have used MERV filters in there, so depending on the machine, they'll be rated anywhere from 8 to 12 MERV.
Okay.
So, the machines are all different and have different CFMs, so it'll take a different filter.
Okay.
And it breaks it down to like 0.01 microns. I'm not sure the exact number.
Yeah, but it's and the purpose of that is that because mold gets airborne, which is one of the main concerns about health-wise, is it deteriorates your indoor air quality. We don't want to disturb the mold to where now it's going to be flying around the house in other areas. We want to contain it in the area we're cleaning it up. That HEPA filter is sucking everything up. So you're saying you leave that equipment in place for a time after your actual physical work is going on to make sure any stray contaminants are picked up.
Especially if there's demo involved. I know we were just talking about cleaning only, but now if we're going into a house and I'm taking down affected material like sheetrock, insulation, and things of that nature, now we're making even more of a bigger mess. And that's where those machines really help, and where I like to keep them stayed in place, because now when we're demoing, we have far more cleaning to do. So it's a lot of HEPA vacuuming over and over and over again. I don't want to even see like a little dot of garbage on the floor, like a little, like a nothing.
So the cleanup is a huge part of the mold cleanup is physically the cleanup of the dust.
That's
and
the
the
hardest
spores.
part. The demo, even though demo's hard physical work, getting it clean to pass an air test
because we're going to
is
test
very
it again.
hard. You
Okay,
have
so
to
that's
really
that makes sense.
detail. We'll go into a room like this. This is all unfinished wood, and we have to clean that wood. Some people will be like, clean the wood. Like, how the hell?
How do you clean the wood? So is it just you're just vacuuming it, or do you use an abrasive? Do you sand it when you let's just say this was covered in mold and we wanted to clean it up?
Always vacuum, HEPA vacuum first to get anything loose and captured in the vacuum, so you're not sending it all over the place.
That limits the amount that's getting blown around.
And then any dark staining can get wire brushed or sanded.
So
along with
heavy
vacuuming.
areas you'll hit with a wire brush or a sander.
Correct. And then once everything's clean that way, we wash it all. We'll set up buckets with an antimicrobial and a deodorizer. Put terry towels in there. Wring them out and wipe everything down. That rag never goes back in the bucket because it's contaminated now.
Wow.
So once it's exhausted, you get
Jeez.
rid of that towel. You get a fresh one.
This is a pain in the butt process.
It's very tedious,
Yeah.
especially when you're cleaning unfinished wood. There's
Yeah.
nails and all types of stuff sticking out.
And
of it.
I think about unfinished wood because I see, as an inspector going in a lot of crawl spaces, that's where I see most of the mold. Most of the mold I find is in a crawl space.
Yeah, there's usually always some in a crawl space.
Yeah, there's always we got these dirt crawl spaces. I'll see the fungus growing through the dirt. It's like
how are you going to
it's
stop it?
sanded up.
You have it's basically the earth under
It's
your
where it
house.
lives. Yeah, that's its home. All right, so we heavily clean it, heavily scrub it, and then we hopefully, after the cleanup and after everything's put back together, we pass our mold test. and we're good to go.
We actually will do that clearance test before any rebuild happens.
Makes sense.
So before a contractor comes in, that mold inspector will come back and make sure.
Yeah, because you don't want to close it up, you fail, now we got to open it back up. Okay.
Exactly.
All right, so we run into this a lot. Crawl spaces have mold in it. It could fail the air sample test in the house, and it obviously needs to be cleaned up. How do we know we need to do invasive? Like, how do you know the line between cleaning the crawl space up and maybe having to cut sheetrock? If we don't see mold on the wall, you know, where do you, because you said you might have to do some invasive stuff. When do we know that has to happen?
If there's no visible growth, but we have elevated air samples, a history of possible water damage.
Yeah, because where there's water, there's mold.
Right, and a highly concerned customer, then I'll recommend what I call exploratory removal. We'll go through the same processes, setting up the right protection, and then between the homeowner and myself, we'll decide on small areas to open in those rooms that are of concern.
Yeah.
Say, let's open a little section, maybe a 1x1 or a 2x2, and open that wall. Let's go on the cavity. Let's pull out the insulation, see if we see anything, and just open up these sections. And hopefully, we don't want to find mold, but when a customer is concerned and looking for answers, I kind of hope to find mold so that I can turn to them and say, all right, thankfully we found something.
Yeah, because you're cutting holes in the wall. But you know what? That's really interesting, because I feel like, from my experience, sometimes I hate to say it, but like sometimes they want to find mold too, because like there's people are so convinced they have a problem. Like I have a mold problem.
It becomes frustrating for them. So
Yeah,
they want
to know
something
for sure. Like, you could clean the crawl space up, and you know, sometimes when I'm talking to people about it, from my understanding, I'm like, you definitely got to clean this crawl space up. So I'm assuming they're going to clean the crawl space. If we run the air sample again and it's clean, I would assume that you wouldn't need any further invasive stuff. But I feel like, because people call me about these problems all the time, and I'm just consulting with them and talking to them from my experiences. I feel like that's not enough. So a service like that, where we can go and be invasive in the least invasive ways possible, where you say you're opening up small walls. So, okay, so that's interesting. So if you find mold in those areas you cut open, now
we'll take it a little further to get the rest of it out.
Yeah, and what does something like that look like? Like, let's say this was finished and we cut open this wall and we see some mold. Do they test that mold that you found?
I typically wouldn't test it at that point.
Because we know mold's
kind of
there.
know what it is.
Yeah.
And I'm going to continue removal that way and this way.
Couple feet off the ground?
Yeah, 2 feet. Unless that, when I cut, you know, I just want to go until I don't see it anymore.
Okay.
You know, get all that affected material out, look at the back of all of it.
And it's the same process, like you said. It's the HEPA vacuum, the cleaning.
Right.
We're doing that over and over again, and then that's when we'll retest.
Correct. Always with the vacuum. And like some people, there's an industry term called the HEPA sandwich. So you vacuum, you wipe, and then you vacuum again. I call it the HEPA hero, because we're freaking vacuuming all the job long.
Yeah.
We're freaking vacuuming.
So you have HEPA vacuums just for days, and
right,
they
and
just
I've
run
become
24/7.
almost like I have a vacuum fetish now.
We love our tools. We geek out about the tools that we use every day. So you have like the top notch HEPA vac.
So
for your birthday, you get the nice HEPA vacuum for your birthday. Yeah.
And nobody, as far as I know, in the remediation realm out here in Long Island is using any of the same vacuums that I use.
You know, and not to get into it,
the
but
best ones.
You know, a lot of the restoration companies are businesses, and they're good businesses. They make a lot of money, but some of the, you know, maybe they cut corners a little bit, and I feel like probably the HEPA vac is probably one of those areas where, because I'm sure, I mean, some tools can get expensive. I'm sure you pay good money for those
some
tools.
of the vacuums can cost almost $1,500 just for
one vacuum. That you're going to beat the crap out of and run.
Right, but if you buy a good one, it lasts you for a long time. I have one unit now I've had probably for about 10 years.
Oh, sweet.
And she's
got
still
your money
cranking.
worth out of it, that's awesome.
As long as you take care of it.
Take care of it, and there's the filters in there are getting changed.
And you have to clean it just like you clean the house after every job. Because you can't go into the next job with a moldy vacuum or a moldy machine, because now you're just going to end up cross-contaminating the house from the crap the last people had.
Yeah, and you could be now failing your closeout test because...
God forbid.
Yeah, and that that happens, right? Sometimes
it's very rare.
Yeah. Okay.
I make it a point to make it very rare because who likes to fail?
Yeah, of course.
So I tout. Toot my horn. I almost always pass.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even just talking to you about your process, it sounds extremely meticulous, and you follow steps probably from experience of being in this industry a long time for knowing the difference.
And then dealing with those mold sensitized individuals, you just don't want to leave any chances or anything behind.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Yeah, well, because you could be somebody who's, maybe they're sick, they're kids, or they're old. There's so many, there's a lot of sympathy that comes along with these mold issues. Because like I said, we've gotten the calls before where people are, it's a lot, I get it a lot where there'll be tenants. They're like, I have a mold problem. It's in my kid's room. I told the landlord they don't want to do it. It's always like something, and
that's a common tale.
I don't get involved in it. I pass it off. But I talk to the people, and I'm like, we're going to sit on the phone for 5 minutes, and we're going to chat about your situation, so at least you can be a little bit more informed when you go and talk to a pro, and you don't just get sold. Right. But yeah, it is always a pretty, it's a crappy situation for them to be in. It kind of
especially
sucks.
A tenant when they don't have a cooperative landlord. Yeah. I go through a lot of that too.
Yeah. I was just dealing with a landlord who was dealing with that situation with a tenant, and he was so willing to clean everything up. I was like, it was funny because I'm normally dealing with the other end of it where this guy was like, dude, I'm going to do the whole, like, he was worried that the mold cleanup, which pretty much sounded exactly like what you described, like he was getting a legit company to do it. It sounded like, he was like worried it wasn't going to be enough. I was like, I think you're good, dude. Like most landlords are going to be like, no, it's fine. It's not even mold, and he was like going crazy about doing it. But, all right, so I have a question here
And now a word from our sponsor, the Ryan Anthony Head Start Fund. This foundation is focused on providing alternative career paths for young people other than just college. If you want to learn more about what they got going on and some updates, you can check them out at lookwhomadeit.org. Now back to the show.
With crawl spaces, I see a lot of mold. Is there like, I hate to say it, is there safe amounts of mold that can be in an unfinished area? Like every crawl space, if you test it, might have some mold in it.
Well, that's one thing I'm highly against. If it's in a soil floor and an open, vented crawl space, I'm highly against charging customers for doing air samples in places like that because we have dirt and we have outside air influence.
So it's going to be
it's going to be elevated already.
Yeah.
And an experienced mold inspector knows that. So in my opinion, I don't feel that air tests should be taken in a place like that because we know. So now if you see mold in the crawl space, you could do a surface sample.
Okay.
All right, that looks like mold. Let's test it. Let's confirm. We know there's going to be mold in the air because the floor is dirt. Yeah. There's mold in the dirt. Yeah. So let's do that. And then once the surface is clean, we can come back, swab that surface for cleanliness, and make sure it's been done correctly.
Okay.
But
you would still, we would do samples inside the house.
Yes, in the finished, controlled living spaces. Attics or crawl spaces that have outside air shouldn't.
Yeah.
You shouldn't
it makes
test
sense.
in those
It makes
areas.
sense because we're worried about the living space.
Right.
So crawl spaces are that unique situation because a lot of them are essentially outside. They're dirt floors, they're open vented. Okay, so
but you have to, if you're trying to keep it under control, I mean, you can clean it and take steps to try to maintain it. Some people even get the fancy encapsulation of the heavy gauge plastic
vapor
on
barrier.
the walls and floors.
Yeah,
Vapor
that's what I
barrier.
recommend. I like properly finished crawl spaces, especially
it's
down here.
costly, but if your home and the health of your home is worth it to you, it's a good investment. It's going to protect the home like a roof. Nobody wants to spend money on a roof. I want to spend money on a nice kitchen or bathroom. But these are areas that are going to prolong the longevity of your home.
A clean crawl space, it's better for your indoor air quality. It's better for your comfort levels in the summer and in the winter. In the summer, it's going to add humidity. In the winter, most of these crawl spaces aren't insulated. We're going to lose heat through our floors. So there's multiple reasons to finish a crawl space. And the problem is most people don't go in the crawl space. We're the guys who go in their crawl space.
Nobody wants to go
Nobody
there.
ever goes in there, and they don't realize these problems exist. So most crawl, it's funny because I'll come out of a crawl space and I'll be like, listen, buy the house, don't buy the house, but that is like the nicest crawl space I've seen in a long time.
Yeah,
so
some nice ones.
we might go to another crawl space that doesn't look like this. So I do like this house based on this crawl space because we just see so many nasty things in a crawl space.
I vowed to never buy a house with a crawl space. And I bought a house with a crawl space.
I got a crawl.
I couldn't pass up the house. It was owned by a very meticulous man.
Oh, nice.
The notes on everything reminded me of my father. So I was like,
nice. I love that. Yeah. There's a lot of hidden value in super meticulous.
Yeah, he took care of everything. It wasn't. It needed to be redone, but he took care of everything.
Yeah, it goes a long way when you take care of it. But yeah, I'm on a crawl space here too, and one of the first things I did was when I was looking at it is I went right in the crawl. It was dry, but still, it traps humidity. I've changed the hardscapes around it, and the schoolyard next to me put this concrete collar in that forces water into the crawl. So now I have elevated moisture levels. So this year I added some low voltage venting to induce ventilation because it's a big open crawl space. I have vents all over the place, but I wanted to induce a little bit of
get some
air
air
movement.
circulation.
Yeah. So we're in the process of cleaning that one up a little bit because I'm sure that I go in there every now and then. There's some dust on those joists, so I'm sure there's something going on. So maybe you'll be coming back and HEPA vacuuming.
Yeah, we could do a
like crawl
podcast
space.
down there.
Yeah, that'd be a fun episode.
Live from the crawl space.
It's a big crawl space, so maybe we'll just do one section. But so now you have crawl spaces, then you have basements, and so many basements. If you ever get gutted a finished basement, there could be a pretty finished basement. There's mold behind the drywall in those situations. So you run into a lot of finished basement mold problems.
I would say the majority of the work is in basements.
Yeah. I mean, basements down here, you're going to get water intrusion from hydrostatic pressure pushing up. But most people don't realize that we live in a really, really humid area, and you can have pumps, you can be above the water line, whatever it is. Humidity wicks through the box beam. Humidity comes in and it gets trapped in a basement. So humidity, a cooled basement because it's conditioned. Mold problems, so obviously basements we can deal with a lot of mold. And the mold cleanup is the same idea there, right?
Yeah, general same. If we have visible mold affected, that came from a leak source, then we know we have some removal required of affected material. Or again, if it's just someone who's concerned and had air samples done and now has elevated levels and now is even more concerned, then we'll just do the cleaning process.
Yeah. Okay. Another unfinished area is the attic. I go into a lot of attics, and you actually commented on the insulation, guys. There's tons of issues associated with moisture intrusion into an attic, humidity getting stuck in an attic, not being vented properly. And I see black staining and white mold growing on attic sheathing. What are we dealing with that?
Well, the black staining comes, I believe, because the roof gets so hot. And now it just bakes the mold into the wood, and now we have this black mold staining, which is very difficult to remove. A lot of inspectors will suggest what's called encapsulation, a different kind than the plastic. Now you're spraying a white pigmented coating.
That's like the Kills paint,
almost. Similar to Kills, but it have antimicrobial properties. Again, I'm against that.
So instead of cleaning it off, we're killing it.
You still have to clean.
Okay, so we clean it first.
And now, since I don't like spraying paint in an attic because it's a confined space, and the manufacturer's suggestions on the product say not to spray it there,
that makes sense.
I'll use a mold stain removal product, typically made from sodium hypochlorite, similar to chlorine. And once the surface is clean, just in the same fashion we do everything else, we apply this with a pump sprayer, and it, in most cases, it will take that stain away and make it look like brand new plywood.
Okay. Oh, wow, that's interesting. So it will pull the stain out of the plywood.
Correct. Yeah, it's pretty neat. If it's OSB plywood, it may not be as effective because of that type of product, but it works fantastic on plywood. You'd be amazed at how good it actually works.
So with the attic cleanups, are they occurring because somebody goes in there and sees the mold in the attic, or are we getting raised mold levels in the living area, and then we identify that it's the mold coming from the attic?
It's usually people who go up to the attic and find something, either selling a house, and the buyer's inspector finds mold. I had a recent one of those in Port Jefferson about a month ago. They're selling a house. Buyer's inspector sees a black mold staining. Buyer wants the house, so seller has to
clean it up,
take care of that problem, so they can get rid of it.
Well, that's it's an interesting point because we have mold in an unfinished area. It's vented to the exterior. If it's not making its way into the living space, lowered concern. But it's the air in the attic. If the air in the attic isn't getting pushed into the living space, we don't have a problem. But if then they move in and they change the conditions of that attic, that somehow the attic pressure changes and is forced into the living area, now we're going to have a problem.
Yep, because sometimes you see it's not black mold staining. You'll go up there, it'll be active. It'll look like a can of soda on a hot summer day. The whole interior side of the sheathing is just condensating because that heat's rising up there from down below, and there's no ventilation. And now you have active mold, so it's not even baked in yet, and it's growing, and it's wet. And if you don't take care of that thing quick, it's just going to, by the time winter's over, forget it. It's going to be a science experiment up there.
And we're going back to getting the attic air into the living space. now more than ever, we have central air in houses, but there's still a lot of houses that don't have AC in it. So you could have had some microbial growth, right? With inspectors love to use anything but mold.
Yeah.
You could have like mold growing
Suspected
in
microbial growth.
Yeah. I call it probably mold, possibly mold. You could have mold growing on the roof rafters, on the sheathing, and now we add the air conditioner in there. You're supposed to seal the ducts properly, but a lot of contractors don't seal the ducts properly. Then the return side of your air handler and of the return ducts, they're sucking in air. There's negative pressure. So now you have mold spores in the attic. You have a negative pressure in the return. It's sucking air in. Now it turns into a problem. So that preventative, let's clean the mold when we buy the house, they don't realize that they just saved their ass when they go to throw in that air handler in the attic. Now they're not sucking mold in and blowing it throughout their house. So there's, even though it might not be the pressing issue today, we can go and change the conditions of the house, and now they're blasting mold all over their house.
Yeah. And that HVAC system is the lungs of the home. I mean, there's almost always mold trapped in it because it's got dust. It's picking up everything. And if you don't maintain that system, change your filters, clean your coils, clean your ductwork if it's cleanable.
Yeah.
I mean, it just can become a nightmare.
So your central air system, you have an air handler, which is a big box with a fan in it to oversimplify it. And then you have ducts that blow the air all over the house. They can be in a crawl space, they can be in an attic. And like you said, they're the lungs of the house. The air is moving through it. I do see a lot of nasty moldy ones, especially in crawl spaces. Like I'll see, because I know what to look for I do duct pressure testing on the energy ratings. So when I go and do a home inspection, I see a leaky air handler. I'm like, that thing's sucking in air. I've opened up air handlers before, and you could see the blower motor's covered in mold. The coil's covered in mold. At that point, can you clean it?
The coil and the cage can be cleaned, but flex duct.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes the units just are so far gone.
Yeah.
You're probably better off replacing it than trying to clean it.
Yeah, that's kind of, when I see it, I kind of tell them, like, once it's in there, and most people just have flex duct running all over everything. And real solid HVAC techs will tell you really can't clean the flex ducts. It damages it. And even cleaning the regular tin, they can damage it, which can lead to more indoor air quality issues. So, all right, so if we have a moldy air handler, there's most likely we're just going to throw that out.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a little, if you're looking at this thing and it's grotesque, and the problem too, you're in a soil, they put them in soil crawl spaces.
Oh my God.
They become disgusting.
Oh.
I
see some really, like, it'll be a beautiful house on the water. I'll go in the crawl, and there is dark mold standing all over the air handler because it's a humid crawl space. You have a cold air handler because it's cooling. It's a temperature difference allows the condensation to form. The mold forms. Now it just becomes a disaster.
Yeah, it would be great if there was a better place to put those things. The attic ain't the greatest. You got the heat baking this thing. You're trying to get air.
There's no good way. There's no good place.
Right.
We have a unique climate zone. We're really hot and humid in the summer. We're really dry and cold in the winter. So we do run into so many problems with where we put our heating and cooling equipment. But yeah, kind of like we solve one problem and we create another one. But you got to prioritize, and mold is an important thing. It's a
I
health
think so.
hazard.
If you care about where you live and you want to be comfortable and not be worried and not get sick, this is a place where you're supposed to feel safe.
Yeah. So I think we got time for one more question. And you spoke, I think before we were talking about working for insurance companies versus working for a client. So you more so often you work directly for the client.
Doing the mold work,
for
the
them.
large majority of my customers are all people who have been denied by their carrier and now need help.
Yeah, because I'm pessimistic with insurance. Like, I've never put a claim in, and I've never heard good stories. Like, some people tell me they got their insurance to pay for a roof, but I'm like, So, in your experience, most mold claims get denied?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, so going through insurance is probably not the best case for them.
Right, and a lot of homeowners shouldn't, well, if they're trying to make a claim for mold, it's best that they say, I'd like to make a water damage claim, not I have mold. Because once the insurance carrier hears mold, they immediately try to deny you. So I always tell my customers, the mold is secondary, but it was caused by this water problem.
Oh, that makes sense.
And if as long as if it's a covered thing, like a leaky pipe or something like that, you should be able to get coverage. But again, I just don't like insurance companies.
Yeah.
So while many restoration companies find it extremely lucrative to do those insurance jobs, which it is very lucrative.
Yeah. They probably know how to navigate that process.
Some of the franchises bring in $5, $10, $15 million a year doing restoration work. It's extremely lucrative. You have to have
Yeah.
the right teams in place. But I just I like this line of work, but I don't like certain parts of it, and I've honed it to my liking.
Yeah. To me,
so
it
to
sounds
speak.
like you like doing the right job, cleaning up the mold, getting it cleaned up. Like you said, you have a good track record of actually getting the job done and taking care of the clients that need it, because the people that need it, they're getting sick.
Right.
So
I
you're
make
doing
an
a good
honest
thing.
living.
Good
I
man.
help people who are in trouble. I solve a problem for them, and I'm able to live the life I want.
That's it, man.
And
I love that.
And call my own shots and do my own thing.
That's it. And clean up the mold. Long Island mold guy.
Right, yeah.
All right, man. I think we're going to wrap. So why don't you take a second, tell the people where they can find you, drop your Instagram handle.
Instagram handle is Long Island Mold Guy. Facebook, same thing. On YouTube as well. TikTok, LinkedIn. Pretty much everywhere. I like to keep busy with my social media, and my website is longislandmoldguy.com, and you can contact me by calling 631-606-MOLD.
That's it, man. Thank you so much. We got the Long Island mold guy, the right guy for your fun guy.
Correct.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you guys for tuning in.
Thank you, too.
Until next time, stay knowledgeable.
All right.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
Yeah, man.